going to speed it up a little bit to make sure that we end right on schedule. Hi, my name is Henk-Jan van Henten, and this is the team that helped me create these games, which you've already seen, which is standing here. Albert, he's standing in the back, and the last which we just heard of is Mark. We are Team Show. This year we're making sure that Magnus is being known within the community. So I'm going to tell this 8-part story about how we created games within Mendix. And it starts with the history. So as I just told you, we are Team Show, and we were thinking about, okay, what can we do, what the community would like, and which would also be nice to challenge Mendix a little bit. So we were thinking like, okay, how can we find the boundaries within Mendix? So we started brainstorming, and then at a certain point, always in brainstorm with technology, you get to the part where you're going to talk about games. And normally, where you get to the games part, you normally stop. But this time, we were looking at each other, and we were thinking like, okay, games in Mendix, that's actually kind of cool, because that is something Mendix is not built for. Actually, when I start hearing to other people about this, the reaction are all the same. They're like, why would you build a game within Mendix? Why? So, but just why? Don't. I think it's actually kind of nice to find out what the boundaries are and what actually the learnings are when you try to do something like creating games. So we had this idea, and then there was only one more issue, and that was that we had to convince our manager that we wanted to create games and then actually display them at Mendix World and also talk about it in the meetup. So with our hopes up, we walked to our manager, and then we asked him the question, are you okay with this if we create with Mendix games and show them at Mendix World? And his reaction was,
I think something like, go for it. Sounds awesome, man.
Yeah. He only had one request, and that is that he wanted to do the music. But we never told him that you can't do music with Mendix. So. Okay, the second part, the goal. So what do we want to achieve with making games with Mendix? So the goal is to show the limitation with Mendix, what the limitations of Mendix are by creating multiplayer games. But we were thinking like, okay, we also have to set some rules, because I know there are some games built with Mendix. I know really build mostly with Mendix, which is a good example. But I know there are also with Mendix, but actually when you look inside of the code, it's only just one widget, which is still only JavaScript. So then you didn't really build a game with Mendix. So we were thinking like, okay, we have to make some ground rules. So the first rule is the game should be quick but fun. So we want to demo at Mendix World. So games should be like 5 minutes max, and must of course be fun to do. So the second thing is creating widgets can only be the last resort. So we would always try to use microflows and pages and nanoflows, so that if somebody would try Mendix for the first time and would think like, I want to create a game, that they could achieve the same thing as that we did, only that we have the knowledge about how to combine things really easily. So the third rule, the game logic will always run in Mendix. Yeah, it's a little bit also about the second part. So every logic should be done in microflows or nanoflows. Last part, the game has to run on multi-touch table. So when we thought about the idea, we were also thinking like, okay, how? And we were like, it would work if we would have like a big table standing there where multiple people could stand around and enjoy the game. And if you can't play it, then you can still see what's happening. So you can see what the interaction is and if it's fun, yes or no. So here's actually the table. It's a 4K screen, and it's running on Windows, which is really the table we're going to use. Part 3, the process. So process is actually quite simple, how these things normally go. We started with an ID. So what we did, we went to the pub. We started getting some beers and started brainstorming about all the games that we could create within Mendix. Next, started. So all the games that I'm going to talk about are created within one. This is a team of 8 people. So then in the part we went to which is in the south of the Netherlands, to go to the place where they have these tables, actually work, and to see each table. Oh, part 4, the games. So as I just told you, we started brainstorming, and this is the list that we came up with all the games which we wanted to create, and we thought that would be possible within Mendix. I'm having some honorable mentions of games that didn't make it, but would be like really cool. Bomberman, for instance. I'm still thinking like, Albert, you still want to do Bomberman, so maybe we will have that at Mendix World. But we didn't make it yet. My personal favorite is Achter die Kurve, which I don't know if you know the game, but you all have like lines and you have to try to make sure that you can't move anymore by closing them in. Really cool. Or another one, WarioWare, where you would have like many mini games, and which would go faster and faster, which would be harder to achieve or to win it. But yeah, it would take too much time. So we were thinking like, okay, what can actually be built with Mendix within these one afternoon? This was the list that was left. Yeah, there are also a lot of boring things now, like quizzes, which we thought of like, okay, that's too easy. So we ended up with 3 games, and these are the lucky ones. And I think maybe some of you already saw some sneak previews on LinkedIn, so you kind of know what's coming then. But the first one is Tetris. We created Tetris, which is a 2-player game with buttons. And we only use basic Mendix parts for this. So this is with microflows and nanoflows, and refreshing the screen with showing a template grid. So the second one is whack-a-mole. So the idea about whack-a-mole is that you click on a mole, and then if you clicked on the mole, then you score a point. Because it's hard to keep track on who whacked what mole, we created different colors for different moles. And then the last one is Draw It, which is, I think, maybe a little bit less famous. But the idea about Draw It is that one player draws something on the screen, and then the other people can guess what it is. If they guess it correctly, then the guesser and the painter will score points. You'll do like, every person would do 1 round, and then in the end you would see who has the most points, and that one wins. Okay, so now we're getting at the better parts, that is the technology. So what did we actually use to create these games? So let's start off with Tetris. So Tetris we created by creating a template grid. The thing is with Tetris is that we created 6 colors, so we had to use conditional visibility. This is a conditional visibility. Based on the color of the block, it would show a different color. Depending on the number of X, so that is how many blocks can be next to each other, it will create multiple blocks next to each other. And then depending on the eye, it will create more and more lists to make sure that the whole grid is being drawn. And then every time the user would press a button, the screen would update, and it would do this flow, decide about the next game state of the screen would be. Later on, I'm going to show some of the challenges which this gives you, but just so you have a little bit of an idea what's underneath it. So next, whack-a-mole. What did we do? We also used conditional visibility, but this time we did it with button. So button, every space has a value, whether it's visible, yes or no. And then depending on what mole is being shown, you get a different button and you get a different mole. And then we had the microphones to detect whether the mole was hit, yes or no. So for every mole, we created a microflow which is attached to the button to make sure that you actually score a point when the mole is hit, and to make sure that the mole also refreshes. Last up, Draw It. So Draw It is also combined of multiple microflows and pages. I think this is the app which has the most pages and most microflows overall, because the game changes over time in what you see on your screen. So I think this is actually the most normal Mendix app of the 3 games. So I think this actually, maybe for like a Mendix developer, this is the easiest one to create, except for some small challenges. And we used the to make and can log into the game. Okay, so up to this part, everything was fine. But then, like you know, when using Mendix, at a certain point, you get to a point where you have like small limitations and small blocks that you have to get across. And we also had some challenges, try to finish things up, and we tried to test the games. So for every game, I have like 3 challenges which we overcame, which I'm going to talk about. First up is Tetris, and that is how to update. And this is the question you'll see 3 times because I think this is the hardest part of Mendix. Because Mendix is actually built with the idea that a user does something and then changes. Well, with a game, you always want it to be the other thing around. You want the screen to always refresh and always change, because most of the time there's also always a time element in there. So make sure that something changes even if nothing happens. So we knew this was a problem, but we were also thinking like, okay, we want to try to solve it in different ways within. So within the Tetris, we were thinking like, okay, maybe we have to change a little bit about how the Tetris game works. So normally with Tetris, it's about speeding up. And when things speed up, you have to be faster with positioning your block. Too late, then it's game. So we changed the rules of Tetris a little bit. What we decided is like, no, we're just giving it a game timer. So you have 5 to create as much points as possible. But then you always have to use user interaction. Block does something. So the screen only refreshes when you press a button. And you have actually 6 actions. To the left, move to the right, drop the block 1 space, drop the block all the way, turn it one way around and turn it the other way around. And with this system, if you press one of the buttons, the user does an interaction, and therefore the screen always refreshes. The second hard part was, okay, how do we draw interaction? Press the button, how do we make sure that the screen then updates? So how does Mendix know where the block should be? And if you turn a block, that what spaces should be colored, yes or no? So how does it decide on that? So there's this massive microflow which Gerwin created. Yeah. So what it does, we first have a split which decides what block it is. So it first checks, okay, are you a square, which is the most top one, where you can see that if it's the most top one, you always get the same result. Because if you turn a square, it will always fill in the same blocks. But for the other ones, the graphics actually change when you turn it. So what this flow does is then decide on what spaces to fill when it turns. The second split is always for the angle. So you have always 4 options, which is the 0 angle, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 and 360. Goes down how to position the block when it's actually moving. So the last trick part is, does it move? Because with Tetris, it could be possible that if the block is sitting in a certain position, that a hard part about Tetris is collision, which is also something you need to check every time a user interaction was done. So you have these 4 flows, which are the most important parts. The first one is can move left. There's also can move right, and that one always checks whether it's possible if the block can still move more sideways, yes or no. Then we have a second microflow which can rotate, which always checks whether a block can still rotate. Because in some ways, if you're already to the side of the screen and you want to turn it, then one block would go out of the screen. So if the block is already completely sideways, then it can be turned and should be moved first one step back before it can be turned. Or we turn it, but then also move it one block sideways. The third flow is determine maximum drop. So when you press down, it has to think about, okay, how far can the block move down? Because sometimes you already have blocks stacked up, which makes it harder to know how far the block actually can down. This flow calculates what's possible. Especially if you have like weird shapes, then it could be that in the middle point it can move down, but in the left point it doesn't move down. So you have to check on multiple places if it has collision, yes or no. And the last part is score lines, and this is something you check for the line, yes or no, and if you actually. So the result, it actually now looks like this. I kind of have a feeling. We're still going to tweak it a little bit with the buttons to make sure that they're a bit more easy to press. But then you can kind of get a feeling about how it works.
Henk-Jan, can you show us the domain model?
Maybe afterwards, okay? I don't have sheets. Oh, sorry, should I repeat the question? The question is whether I can show the domain model. I think I can show it afterwards. Then the second one is whack-a-mole. So this is something I already told you a little bit, but we were thinking like, okay, how can we make sure that moles are being shown yes or no? And how can we make sure that if a mole is being hit, that we show something else without applying JavaScript? So what we did, we created two buttons for everything, which is one button is showing the mole, and a second button will be shown, which is the mole hit. I'm not sure whether it button. It could also have been just like maybe like a container which showed the mole. Reusing test classes of the moles was a little bit more easier. So you have conditional visibility, which decides whether a mole should be shown, yes or no. If it should be shown, then it would show the mole. If it's then hit, then the state of the mole would change, so it would show the mole being hit. Second challenge was, again, how to update. So with the moles, we have the same problems as the Tetris. So the moles should just randomly pop up without the user interacting in any way with the application. We don't want people to press all the time to make sure that a mole would show up. The moles should just come up on their own. So I know we didn't want to use widgets, but at this point there was like really no other solution than using a widget. So what we then decided is, okay, if we do use widgets, then first we have to look if there is already an existing widget which can solve this. Because then still anybody who would be new at Mendix could do this. So we used the microflow timer widget. 500 milliseconds refreshes the grid and yes or no. Now based on a randomizer, if a mole should pop up, yes or no. Okay, the question is, couldn't you use a scheduled event for this? We tried scheduled events. The thing with scheduled events is that if you use a scheduled event and then refresh an object which is being shown to you, then it doesn't always update your user interface.
Now the scheduled event will be on the server side, but then a refresh timer on the
I know, but still, if there's a refresh in the scheduled event, then it didn't.
No refresh in the scheduled event.
Okay, but then still the client doesn't know that it should change something.
But if the client refreshes, so you store a value in the data.
That's true, but if if I would use a scheduled event still for the moles to pop up, that could be possible. So then this would only be about the refreshing. So what you then create is you use this microflow for a refreshing system and use the scheduled event for the moles popping up, which I think maybe, yeah, it's not that a bad solution. Thing is, then I would create 2 timers, so we could discuss whether that would be possible, yes or no. I think then the moles will be more reliable. The thing is now that if you open 2 tabs, then moles will pop up faster. So maybe I think your solution would maybe be better in the end. Yeah. Yeah.
You've not used a loop in a microflow that only triggers on the press of the first mole.
Okay, so your question was, could you not trigger a microflow loop when pressing a mole? Yeah, I think you could do that, which would also be a nice solution to implement. Thing only with I know with loops, when they run endlessly, then you can't always be sure that they keep running. So we would have the risk of the game stopping suddenly because the microflow stopped, and then it would be hard to restart it again. But
Plus the mole needs to disappear without you pressing it. Why? Oh, okay.
yeah, and you would need to implement something like a sleep within the loop to make sure that there's also like a short break within it. Could be, yeah. It's not something we tried, but I dare you.
Whack-a-mole 2.
Yeah. So the last part is whack more moles. So up until this, whack-a-mole was actually quite easy to create. Then we got to the touch stage. We were standing there with the 3 of us, Milan, Albert and me. And we were starting to try to play the game. And we found out that if you try to whack 2 moles at the same time, it doesn't work. So we created like this test thing where we had 4 buttons, and then we would keep scores. If you press the button, then a counter would go up, just to check whether multi-touch would even be possible within Mendix. We had a microphone, and it didn't work. So then we were thinking like, okay, if microflows don't work, maybe nano at a client. So maybe this is like a server client. So we use nanoflows to run at the client, and then it would work. So what actually problem looking into this this thing is that this is actually not a limitation of Mendix, actually a limitation of a browser. So the thing with a browser is that a browser typically dispatches emulated mouse and click events when there is only a single active touch point. So what happens is it emulates a multi-touch interactions involving 2 or more active touch points will usually only generate touch events. So if we looked inside of the code, we found out in JavaScript that all the buttons only react to mouse events, to a click actually. So there's actually not a way, because if you have multiple fingers on the browser, it always only registers touch points. There's actually no way to trigger more than one button at the same time. So yeah, we like a challenge, so we try to fix it. So the next thing is we found out, we started reading a little, and we found out that there's actually an order in which events happen within JavaScript. So if you do press on, for example, your mobile phone or on a tablet, this always happens in this order. So first the touch starts is fired, then a touch move is fired if you move it, then a touch end is fired if you lift your finger. And it's always in this order. Then if you use touch move to move your finger around, the first touch move will be called, then mouse move will be called. So always first touch, then mouse. For mouse down, it's also first, if you put your finger down, first touch start will be called, then mouse down will be called. For lifting your finger up, first touch end will be called, and mouse up will be called. And the last will be if you put your finger down and your finger up, then it will register a click. So it's always in this order of priority. And what you can do in JavaScript is also say to an action, if you come to a certain point, don't trigger the other ones anymore, because you have a priority system. So you can say to JavaScript, if a touch start happens, then I don't want the mouse down to be fired at all. So you can prevent things, which was interesting, which is something which is told here. So you can cancel things. So this is interesting. So we're like thinking like, okay, maybe for this one time we have to create a widget which can hack this thing around. So we created a widget which is called event. And what it does is if you have a touch end, so if you lift your finger, then it stops sending events to the browser at all. So it doesn't register any click anymore, any mouse down anymore. And what I then say is that if a touch end ends, then we'll just trick the browser in thinking that a click happened. So with this system, I know this is a little technical, so, but with this system it became possible that every time you lift a finger, a click happened, which could then be done 12 times in the same moment, which is pretty cool. I have one remark. If you ever want to do this, production application, because this breaks your whole application, because if you only have a mouse, then clicks never happen anymore, because it's all prevented. So in the end, we have Whack-A-Mole, which looks like this. Here you see the multiple colors, and if you press it, you score a point, and everybody has one color. So the last one is Draw It. So for Draw It, we also had the challenge, okay, how can we draw? So we tried this thing with Tetris, where we had like this tempered grid, where you would have like pixels. So we were first discussing like, okay, maybe we can create like this insane grid, and if you move your finger over it, then we have a line. So no, that wouldn't work. So yeah, we had some other thoughts, but we came to the conclusion pretty fast, like, okay, maybe for this we also need to do like a little small hack. Sorry. No, you're a little disappointed. But we created a canvas draw, which is a widget that shows a canvas line. That's all it does. Here we had the same problem with how to update. Actually, this was, I think, the part where we tried to schedule. But with the problem with scheduled events here is that you also have multiple clients which need to connect to this. And it's really hard to make sure that all the mobile phone players also get their screens refreshed without an interaction. So in this case, we did have to do the same thing as we did with the last game, which is used the microflow timer for updating the screen. But I think the hardest part with Draw It is keeping everything synchronized. The thing with Draw It is that maybe 10 people would join the game. They would all have their mobile phones with a mobile browser looking at the game. But if somebody gets it right, then every phone had to be refreshed and had to make sure that they understand what happened and what's happening next. So we use this concept which is being known within games, which is called using a game state. So we decided on using an enumeration, and this is all the states where the game can be in. So the first state is new. This is when a game is created. People can sign up. If you're signed up, then the state goes to waiting for players until everybody is there. Then on the table you can start a game. Then the round would go in progress. If the round is in progress, then all the mobile phones refresh. The drawer will see what he has to draw. The guessers will have the option to start guessing what it is. Which is all being done, so you can see the screen here, which is all done with conditional visibilities, depending on what the game state is. So it's all in one screen, so the screen automatically refreshes, and you would always be sure that something is being shown to the user. And then after a round is in progress, the round is finished, you'll see who guessed it correctly, who scored the points. The last part would be game finished, and that is when the game is done and you'll see the winner. And then we will start all over again with new. Make sure every client is in sync and what's being shown to them and what the game state is actually all about. Draw it looks like this. So here you have different colors and then you can move it. We kept it simple, so if you want and if a new round starts, then you could press clear and then you have a clear canvas again. So the result. I have the short video of how it looks. So the next part is that, I know that you want to play them. You want to see it for real, if we actually manage to do it, yes or no. Thing is, we need some last finishing up to make sure that the game will also run over the day. And it's also quite expensive to have this table. And actually to get it here and then move it anywhere else. So we decided, like, okay, I know this is hard, but you have to wait a little bit. But I know you're all going to Mendix World, so I'm pretty sure you'll be there. And we will also be there with the table, so you can try the games out and see it for yourself. And come challenge us in our games.
All right.
Thank you very much. Questions? Yeah.
I do have to ask because one of our colleagues tried to do it. Did you check any of the frames per second limits of Mendix?
So your question is, did you check any of the frames per second limit of Mendix? This is the funny part is that actually when we started it, we were scared about the graphics, which would need to be refreshed and whether the browser would be fast enough with refreshing the graphics. But it turned out that Mendix is actually pretty good with graphics because it's really optimized with CSS, and CSS actually does a really good job within the browser. So there was, I think our biggest problem was never the refresh rate of the screen. It was more a problem of the logic which we run in our application. So I can see there is one remark. I think the most slow part is conditional visibility. So if you have a lot of conditional visibilities, that takes a lot of time because every time you refresh the screen, it has to check again whether it should show something yes or no. Yeah. And I'm not the biggest geek here, but I also know that sometimes, I'm not sure, does conditional visibility run on server side or client side? Does anybody know?
Client side.
Client side?
Yeah.
Okay. So we know. Sorry. Yeah, we didn't check it, but I think it's really depending on the system. Yeah.
One suggestion for your last game, the draw game.
Yeah.
When you are in the startup mode, so people need to register, you could show a QR code on the table.
Yeah.
And people can scan the QR code to enter the right session with their browser. So I have the URL of the game session. Being in the QR code, so you scan it and immediately you're in the right session of the game.
Yeah.
People who were participating in the past are kicked out automatically because it's a different session going on.
Thanks. One remark, because we did think of it. The thing is that we have to connect everybody to the same Wi-Fi network in order to make sure that everybody can join the server, yes or no. Because we're running the games most of the time locally, because that gives us a little bit of performance boost. And what I was thinking, like maybe we can adjust the Wi-Fi, that if you enter the Wi-Fi that it shows up the page or something. But else I would use QR code. Yeah, thanks.
Are you loading the mall images
So did we store the images in Mendix, or did we just use it in the CSS and sort it in the team? That's your question. Yes. So I'm looking at Albert, because I know Albert. Oh, we stored it in Mendix, he thinks. Yeah. Yeah.
How many games you used the nanoflows?
And how many, the question is, and how many games did you use the nanoflows? In the end, we didn't use the nanoflows. I only used it for a test. And the thing with nanoflows is that actually I like, we started out and we liked actually the idea of nanoflows, and I really want to use nanoflows. The only problem with nanoflows is that if you try something in nanoflows and it doesn't work, and you then want to convert it to microflows, then you would have to do it all over again. Which is something we can change as a community, so we should try to change it, because I think it would really boost up nanoflows if you could try something first in nanoflows and then convert it to a microflow if that doesn't help you solve your problem. But that was for us like a reason to just rather start in microflows than use nanoflows. So that's. But we're still thinking about trying some nanoflow things, maybe in Tetris, because I think maybe there it could work to detect some collisions. And then we can use the JavaScript side, which I know runs faster than Mendix. So maybe we're still thinking about trying it. But yeah, we didn't use it yet. Yeah. More questions? Yeah.
You made it clear that you were doing this exercise to find the limitations of Mendix.
Yeah.
Have you now finally learned not to build games in Mendix?
Well,
where are you on that right now?
Where you can't stop me.
It's not a personal question, but
no, I think I'm not going to make my business out of it. That's for sure. Albert is. I see. Yeah.
So, as you said, you were doing this to find the limitation of Mendix.
Yeah.
Did you, in this process, learn things that you can use in your business cases that are added value, or was it just a standalone case?
So the question is this also, did you learn some things which you can always also use in your business applications? Yeah, well, the thing is, do I really have like components which I would now use in my business application? To be really fair, no. I don't think I will use these widgets which we created in any application, especially not the touch thing. But what we did find out is that on the graphical side of Mendix, it's actually pretty good. And I think for that sometimes I'm a little bit scared of using like CSS and animations because I'm not sure how they will work with Mendix. But I don't think that's really fair that I have these feelings about using animations and CSS in combination with Mendix, because I don't see any problems with it. Which actually, normally, I used to be a mobile developer, and I would use to create, and then I know you had like HTML apps. And HTML's app used to be like really crappy with animations and refreshing, and therefore, in the end, most people first started with HTML apps and then still decided, like, okay, I'm going to build it native. And this did change my opinion a little bit about how mobile applications, web mobile applications can actually look on mobile devices. Because I think browsers have grown a lot over time, and I think this is a good example that it did. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe for me, I would like to see some more pieces of delight for the users of Mendix applications. Most Mendix applications are pretty stale when you use them. The image doesn't change as long as you don't do anything. There's no like little cool swoops or swipes or I don't know, glimpses if you click the OK button, and this gives us more of an insight in what small changes could you do to make the day a bit happier for those that are using the Mendix application every day, and get a bit off the beaten path, and maybe hide a little chess game in there as well if they, I don't know, sign in on their birthday or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think I have a nice challenge for your webcam game, because now you're using images.
Yep.
I think you can only use CSS to create the mold.
I'm going to give that. I'm going to give that challenge to our graphical designer.
I think it's possible.
Okay.
Okay, guys, on that bombshell, we're gonna call it a day, but not yet, because the bitter balls, they're really getting cold right now. Thank you very much for attending this first meetup at Magnus. We thought it was a great success, and we're going to talk about it during drinks, so please feel free to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.